So in this case, I'll start because it's part of the introduction. So good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, or good evening, wherever you are in the globe. So this presentation today is part of the monthly webinar of our UKRI Interdisciplinary Circular Economy Centre for Mineral-Based Construction Materials. And today we have three speakers into the topic of gypsum waste recycling, and the presentation is called Driving High Gypsum Waste Purity and Plasterboard Recycled Content Through Acid Purification Technology. And the presenters are Dr. Miguel Castro-Diaz, who is the Research Associate in the Purification and Processing of Gypsum at the School of Architecture, Building and Civil Engineering at Loughborough. And second speaker is Paul Needham, who is the Strategic Development Director of ENVA. ENVA is a leading provider of recycling and resource recovery solution, including plasterboard recycling, with locations across the United Kingdom and Ireland. And Paul is responsible for the sustainable development of Recycling England business, which also includes the development of new processes, new material streams, plus the improvement to existing operation. He has been involved in the industry for over 35 years. And the third speaker is Dr. Karim Diralazadi, who is a project leader at Saint-Gobain Interior Solution, working across different projects on plasterboard and insulation systems. So, so the meeting is being recorded. If you don't wish to appear in the recording, please keep your cameras off. There will be 20 minutes presentation by Miguel, Paul, and Karim. After this, please do join the discussion either by raising your digital hand. You may also submit questions via the chat at any time if you do not wish to speak. The recording will be made available and will be emailed to you and shared on our social media next week. So Miguel, Paul, Karim, floor is yours if you want to start your presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mohamed. So this is the layout of our presentation. So first I will give a brief overview of the ICEBERG project. The work we are presenting today is part of this project. It's an Horizon 2020 project. Then I will give an introduction about the plasterboard waste sources, problem definition, aim and objectives of this work, and then into the results, lab scale gypsum purification process, validation of this process at pilot scale and at industrial scale, the production of iron plasterboard prototypes and their validation, and finally the conclusions and future work. So the ICEBERG project, as I said, is a Horizon 2020 project, and the consortium of this project is 35 partners from 10 European countries. Out of these 35 partners, there are 24 industrial partners. And we are covering 6 circular case studies for 6 different end-of-life building materials: concrete, ceramics, wood, plasterboard, glass, and polymeric insulated foams and inorganic super insulation materials. So the work we are presenting today is about plasterboard, and there are all these stages in the circular case studies. The first stage is pre-demolition and demolition. Second one is sorting, reuse, processing. The third one is the circular design of the buildings. Fourth, manufacturing of building products. Fifth, building executions, and sixth, use and exploitation. So currently there are 3 sources of plasterboard waste. The first source, we call it construction plasterboard waste, and is generated during construction projects. And this waste is segregated on site, so is defined as clean plasterboard waste and is usually recycled. Then there is another source, which is refurbishment plasterboard waste from refurbishment projects, and also demolition plasterboard waste from demolition projects. These 2 wastes, refurbishment and demolition plasterboard wastes, are non-segregated and they are defined as contaminated. So they are usually not recycled for that reason. For example, on the right-hand side, you see a plot, and this is for plasterboard waste recycling in the UK in the year 2016. And you can see that there is a lot of information about construction plasterboard waste in red, but in terms of recycling, but no information about refurbishment and demolition plasterboard waste for recycling. So it is assumed that most of this plasterboard waste ends up in landfill. So, as I said, the current plasterboard waste recycling plants only reclaim gypsum from construction plasterboard waste through mechanical processes. And one of the main challenges in reclaiming gypsum from refurbishment and demolition plasterboard waste comes from the difficulty to achieve consistent purity in the gypsum that is higher than 92%. And this is due to the highly cross-contamination of the waste. Not only we have bulk contaminants in the plasterboard waste from refurbishment and demolition projects, but we also have water-soluble impurities which interfere in the plasterboard manufacturing process. These water-soluble impurities can migrate to the interface between the gypsum and the paper during plasterboard manufacturing and prevent the paper attaching to the gypsum core of the plasterboard. So these water-soluble impurities must be minimized. So this is the current situation in the plasterboard life cycle. We have virgin gypsum mining, which provides most of the gypsum for plasterboard manufacturing, and then some recycled gypsum from construction plasterboard waste, which is also incorporated into plasterboard manufacturing. And end of life, most of this plasterboard waste, so is demolition plasterboard waste, ends up in landfill. Currently, also the average percentage of recycled gypsum from construction plasterboard waste is around 10%. And the aims of this work in ICEBERG is that we try to develop circular plasterboards with 35% recycled gypsum content, so much higher than the current 10% recycled content. And we source that recycled gypsum from refurbishment and demolition plasterboard waste. How do we manage to do that? Well, we have developed a lab-scale purification process to reclaim the gypsum from refurbishment and demolition plasterboard waste. And we achieve consistently high purity, more than 86% in this recycled gypsum. We call it purified because it has been going through a purification process. Then we validated this purification technology from lab scale to pilot scale, and then from pilot scale to industrial scale. And then we manufacture circular plasterboard prototypes with 35% of this purified gypsum, which exceeds the average 10% recycled content in current plasterboards. So this is our aim. We increase the recycled content in the plasterboard from 10% to 35%. We increase the circularity of this product. We minimize the amount of virgin gypsum required for plasterboard manufacturing, and all the plasterboard waste generated at end of life can be recycled. In the long term, what we aim is to avoid the use of virgin gypsum mining, so then it would be fully circular process. And this is the lab-scale gypsum purification process. On the left-hand side, at the top, you can see the two wastes, the refurbishment plasterboard waste on the left and the demolition plasterboard waste on the right. What we did was to collect, I think it was 30 kilos of each, and we segregated those 30 kilos, and you can see the segregated plasterboard just underneath. And then we separated different bulk contaminants like mortar, paint, paper, foil, and foam, among others. Then once we sorted this plasterboard, we crushed it and sieved it, and we did this continuously to crush the material to a very fine powder for acid-leaching purification, but also to remove some residual paper fibers in the plasterboard waste or in the gypsum. And finally, we did the ICEBERG acid-leaching purification at lab scale. So we used different conditions of temperature, acid concentration. We used sulfuric acid, and then different residence times. And we found out that in the best conditions to maximize the removal of impurities was doing the acid-leaching purification at 90 degrees. And then you can see the concentration between 5 and 10% sulfuric acid in water. Residence time between half an hour and 1 hour. And you can see in yellow that regardless of the gypsum coming from reinforcement plasterboard waste or demolition plasterboard waste, in yellow, we have the identical conditions, 90 degrees, 5% sulfuric acid, and 1 hour residence time, and we achieve our objective of more than 96% purity level in the final product, in the purified gypsum. So this summarizes what we have done at lab scale since we collected the material till the end, till we purified the material, the gypsum. So we started with plasterboard waste, which was 77 to 90% impurity. Then after mechanical or manual segregation, we increased the purity to between 85 and 92%. After crushing and sieving, we further increased the purity to between 92 and 96%. And finally, the acid purification process managed to increase the purity to 96.5 to 97% consistent purity. And then what we did was to do the validation at pilot scale. So at the top are the conditions we used in the lab, and these were conditions we suggested to ENVA to try at pilot scale. And now I'm going to pass the floor to Paul, who can explain the process for pilot scale testing.
Yeah, thanks, Miguel. Afternoon, everyone. I'm Paul Needham, Development Director for ENVA, and I'm joined today by Megan Sands, who's our technical advisor for our hazardous waste treatment facility in Paisley. So in terms of background, we've been recycling plasterboard and working with British Gypsum for over 20 years as part of their plasterboard recycling service. I believe during that period we've collected and recycled over 500,000 tonnes of material that has been reused. So we're really delighted to be part of this ICEBERG project to explore the potential opportunity for recovering plasterboard from refurbishment and demolition plasterboard wastes. Really just to help as development of our business, but also to reduce the dependency on mined gypsum. Our involvement has really been in two stages. The first part of it really has been to collect plasterboard from refurbishment sources. So we've collected waste from a refurbishment project at the Loughborough University campus and also from another refurbishment project. We've then brought the material back to our facility at Colwick, Nottingham, and we've put it through a mechanical recycling process where we've taken out contamination. Now, plasterboard is pretty well segregated on site, but what we do find is, there is still contamination. So the typical material that we found as part of, the cleanup process was wood from battens, metals from studding, cabling, and electric sockets. So we would have removed all that material. So we're left with physically a very clean product. From there, we would have processed it down to a powder of a maximum size of 4 mil. That material would have then been transported up to processing at Paisley. And this is where I think that, in terms of the stages, the treatment stage has been, a lot more challenging for us than the mechanical cleanup. So during sort of 2022 and early 2023, we carried out the pilot scale trial. As you can see on the slides, we used a 205 litre plastic drum and we had an external heating jacket on it. So we mixed at a ratio of 3:1 gypsum, or should I say sulfuric acid solution with gypsum. That was heated up and kept at a sort of, temperature between 60 and 90 degrees for over an hour. The next stage was neutralisation. Because one of the requirements from British Gypsum is that they need a plasterboard with a pH between 5 and 8. So the neutralisation was really something that we found quite challenging. Initially, we used a powdered lime slurry at a ratio of 3:1 with an addition rate of about 8%. But what we found after agitating overnight, that we got a pH of 2 to 3. When we pressed it, we found that the pH soared to between 9 and 10, which was out of spec. So we carried out a number of trials with different addition rates and different sort of retention times in terms of stirring, but we couldn't achieve the target 5 to 8, or we would either overshoot or undershoot. So we carried out further tests, and it was suggested, by the team in Paisley that we actually use a lime solution rather than a slurry. And trials using this material proved more successful, and we were confident that we could achieve, consistently a pH of between 5 and 6. So we then moved on to the industrial scale, but the pilot scale was very useful for us to understand the process and understand, where the sort of pinch points and challenges in terms of setup. So we have a large reactor tank at Paisley that you can see on the top photograph there. That's an 8-ton capacity tank with a large agitator in there. So we would process batches of about 5 tons, which we felt were the optimum size, through the mix of the sulfuric acid solution, and then we would manually put into the process the powder, as you can see on photograph number 1. Now, it took us about 2 to 3 hours to load all the powder into the tank, and then after that we allowed the sort of the purification process to sit there for 2 hours to make sure that we'd achieve the full purification. From there, we would add in the lime solution to achieve the required pH, and that would be through hourly testing. We would check the pH of the material, and from there, if extra lime was required, we would add it. From there, once we're happy we'd got the target pH, we would press it through the filter press that you can see on step 3. And again, there was 1 or 2 challenges in terms of just getting the material through without stalling the pumps and blockages, but we were able to achieve that, and was able to achieve a cake with a sort of dry matter content of just over 50%. So that material was bagged and then stored on site, ready for the next phase of processing.
Thank you, Paul. And now I'm going to show the production of the iceberg plasterboard prototypes. Kerem, if you want to explain how this was produced.
Thank you. Thanks, Miguel. So we received that iceberg purified gypsum for prototype manufacturing. But first we produce our reference samples, which is a standard plasterboard, which is a 95% weight of gypsum, 4% paper, and 1% additives. So basically we calcine the powder, then we mix it with water and the additives, and then we add the paper literally and produce the plasterboards. That's gonna be for our reference samples. And then once we have the iceberg purified gypsum, we mix it with 35% to 65% ratio. And then we carry out the same process to produce our iceberg prototypes as well, for comparing with our reference sample. And then those samples are tested. If you can move to the next slide, Miguel. Yep. We test the surface hardness, flexural strength, and thermal conductivity for both standard plasterboard and iceberg plasterboards. So for the surface hardness, they're literally the same. We haven't seen any change. For the flexural strength wise, the iceberg one is slightly lower than the standard plasterboard, and for thermal conductivity wise, they're really close. Slightly higher thermal conductivity on the iceberg plasterboard side. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Kerem. So basically, in terms of main conclusions, what we have to say here is that although there are some variations in the properties of the iceberg plasterboard compared to the business as usual, the iceberg plasterboard fulfills all the requirements in terms of surface hardness, flexural strength, and thermal conductivity established by these British standards on the right-hand side, BSEN 520 and BSEN 12524. So in terms of conclusions, as we mentioned from the beginning, the plasterboard waste are sourced from construction, refurbishment, and demolition projects, but only gypsum from construction plasterboard waste is currently reclaimed. The industrial scale iceberg acid-leaching purification process has been proved to produce consistently high purity gypsum, which is more than 86% in chemical purity, and coming from the refurbishment and demolition plasterboard waste. And this is the first time this has been achieved. Iceberg plasterboard prototypes have been produced containing 35% of this purified gypsum, and their mechanical and thermal properties were determined. and we found that the surface hardness, thermal conductivity, and flexural strength of the iceberg plasterboard prototypes fulfill the requirements established in British standards EN 520 and EN 12524 for standard gypsum plasterboards. So in terms of future work, as you saw before, what we got in the after filtration in the industrial scale acid-leaching purification process, that material, that purified gypsum, was quite wet. The water content was 50%. And we need to reduce that water content to less than 10% in order to be used for plasterboard manufacturing. At lab scale and pilot scale, that is very straightforward. But at industrial scale, we need to dry tons of it, and that is very time consuming. So this is work in progress, and it should be follow up in the next few months. Once the material has been dried to less than 10% in water content, that purified gypsum can be sent to the manufacturing site, and the iron plasterboard can be manufactured. The process is exactly the same. The only difference is the ratios of virgin gypsum and recycled gypsum in the plasterboard product. But the process doesn't need to be altered at all. The conditions are exactly the same. And finally, the iceberg plasterboard will be installed in a building, and that is depending on the requirements of the construction company. And that is all for our presentation. If you have any questions.
Thank you very much indeed, Miguel, Paul, and Karim, for the presentation. And maybe now we'll open the floor for questions. So like I said, if you would like either to raise your digital hand or type in your question in the chat, if you could, please. So we have a question from Ben. No, there's no question, just statement, I think. Big potential impact from this. Okay. So maybe I'll start with a question, Miguel, regarding the acid purification process. In the end, you come up with a lot of wastewater. So what happened to the wastewater, please?
Yes, the wastewater in this project, we haven't treated it at industrial scale for the simple reason that the volumes were too excessive and were not economical in the project. So this was not anticipated. However, we did some lab tests for the wastewater when we did this, and we found out that this wastewater is basically sulfates of calcium and magnesium. So what we can do with this wastewater is treat it and recover a magnesium-rich gypsum. So we can precipitate a magnesium-rich gypsum by adding lime to this wastewater, and the precipitate, it can be used as a fertilizer. And the water, once we remove this precipitate, which can be commercialized as a fertilizer, the wastewater can be reused in the purification process. So it could be reused here again in the tank, added in the picture in number 2. So that wastewater will be reusable, and it will not impact the purification process, the efficiency of the purification process. As I said, we couldn't do this at the industrial scale, but we look at the composition of the wastewater produced at industrial scale, and we compare the composition of that wastewater with the one we obtained at lab scale, and it was almost identical. So we are sure that it will be feasible to do it. It will be feasible to recover this valuable fertilizer from the wastewater and reuse the treated water back into the process.
Thank you, Miguel. I think that would be a very useful thing, especially for maybe agricultural application as well. So we have a question from Richard. Please, Richard.
Yes, very quickly before I have to jump onto another call. You talked about the how the iceberg gypsum is fitting into the standards, either exceeding or close to. I'm just interested in what the practical applications of that is. Is there anything in terms of what we use plasterboard for that means that certain uses are sort of less likely or less easy?
Yes, we have aimed only to match the performance of a standard plasterboard. So there are no specific requirements for the plasterboard in terms of fire, noise, or any other properties. It will be to replace standard plasterboards at this stage. And one thing we need to be having in mind is the impact of this chemical treatment, because at the end of the day, we are using a chemical treatment to purify the gypsum on the long-term properties of the plasterboard. So at the moment, the plasterboard performs very, very well, and we can use this plasterboard instead of a standard plasterboard, and that is the main purpose of this gypsum, to manufacture standard plasterboards, not to manufacture high-spec plasterboards. And we need to also verify that the properties don't change over time, because we don't know what the acid treatment can cause on the product in the long term. Let's say that maybe in 30 years, we aim that the properties are still the same, but we have done a chemical treatment. It's not like a physical treatment that the gypsum doesn't change at all. Here we are changing the gypsum crystal size, the gypsum shape, crystal shape. So this may have an impact in the long term, and that the validation at this stage is good, but it has to be monitored over time as well, just to be sure that there are no issues with this chemical treatment.
Okay, lovely. Thank you very much. I must drop off and join another call, but thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you for coming. Thank you. Cheers. Any other questions from the attendees? Okay, I think we have one question from John Philip. Good to see you, John Philip. How are you? I can't hear you. I'm muted. John Philip?
Yeah, nice to see you again, Mohamed. Okay. So a question about the acidic condition, the sulfuric acid conditions. Do you believe it is strong enough to destroy any potential asbestos that could be mixed together with the waste?
No. This acid treatment is not designed to remove asbestos. The material the waste must be free of asbestos in the first place. The problem with asbestos is that it's not easily degraded, and that is a problem. Asbestos is based on is a silica product, silicon oxide, and this acid treatment will not destroy it. And that is one thing we found out. When the waste contains high levels of silica, this acid leaching process will not affect the silica content. And what happens is that when we have a waste which is 8% silica, the gypsum contains 8% silica, after the acid leaching process, it may be reduced but a little amount, from 8% to 7 or 6%, which is quite high. So there is no way for this acid purification process to remove asbestos or to remove high silica contents. And one contaminant in plasterboard could be silicone. Silicone is used in construction to fix plasterboards or to glue all finishings to plasterboard, and silicone is not it will not be affected by the acid process. So asbestos must be removed at the demolition site. It must be removed from the plasterboard. Otherwise, it will not be possible to remove it later on in the recycling process. So this is one condition we need to be very, very careful about.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think the next question is from Teresa. Teresa, please.
Hi, hello. Thank you so much. Sorry, I arrived late today because I was in a previous meeting. So you might have already discussed this and I might have missed it. But I wanted to ask you, the samples for plasterboard, did you collect them from mixed waste? in construction sites, or were there especially selected pieces of plasterboard that were collected before demolition?
Okay, so the one on the left, the reinforcement plasterboard waste, we went to a local recycling site here in Nottingham, and they have a skip where they collect reinforcement plasterboard waste from different sources. So it was, as you can see in the picture, I don't know if you can see clearly, but there is plasterboard, but there are a lot of contaminants mixed with it. We found cans, metal cans, and we found wood. We found all kind of waste in there. So we had to collect the material from this skip piece by piece, but we also collected some waste to make it representative of the sample. So we were also collecting some of the typical waste we found in this skip. In terms of the demolition plasterboard waste, it was the same case. In this case, we collected this waste from one of the recycling sites from ENVA. This is located in Leicester. And we collected it from a big pile of plasterboard waste, but it was even worse than the skip. It was unbelievably contaminated. And here we found even plasterboard which was attached to foam, and it was really, really difficult to segregate. But we still collected that waste because it was representative. So it was all the waste we collected was from sources and from without previous segregation. And we tried to collect material, all the material we found in those sources. So from the skip, we collected the plasterboard, but we collected also the contaminants, the bulk contaminants. And from the demolition plasterboard waste, we did the same.
And you didn't. You said that you manually sort the contaminants, but some of them will be stuck to the gypsum, so you grind them together.
Yes. So we saw this plasterboard and we collected it, and we saw plasterboard which was easily separated from contaminants, and other ones which were attached to mortar and attached to foam, and we collected them as well. The manual sorting as such was done in the lab, in the second picture below. We didn't do any sorting when we collected the material. We collected material, but we collected waste. We collected a representative sample of what we found in the skip or in that pile from the demolition plasterboard waste.
Thank you. Thanks so much. I'm really interested about the level of contamination and how easily it will be to segregate at an industrial scale.
We tried to be quite realistic in the sense that we didn't try to collect only the plasterboard. We tried to collect as much waste as possible as well, as many contaminants as possible as well, because this is a waste and it's not homogeneous. So depending on the sample we collect, it will have higher degree or lower degree of contamination. So we try to collect as many contaminants as possible. Some of them are detached, so are easily segregated later on, but some of them were attached, like mortar and foam. So we collected those contaminated, even foil backing. We collected those. We didn't go for the clean ones. We went for the ones which were more difficult to recycle rather than the easy ones to recycle, because it wouldn't make any sense to collect clean plasterboard waste from these sources, which would be able to be recycled currently by recycling sites. So
yeah, I think that's really, really interesting. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Teresa. Thank you, Miguel. Can't see any other questions. So maybe my next question for Karim, if you look at the characterization of the prototype, Karim. So, for example, for the flexural strength, the ICEBERG plasterboard prototype was much lower than the business as usual plasterboard. Is there any implication in its installation, in its application? Do you think it would be applied specifically to some plasterboard types, or because if it's lower?
I don't know. I don't have an answer for that one right now. I have to go and check to see if there's a specific standard for different applications where we can use it. And again, these ones are small scale tests, it might be even much better than once we do a much bigger production, a proper plant scale.
Okay, thanks, Karim. Again, maybe my question again, because I want to ask question for each, for Miguel, Karim, and now Paul. So, Paul, your experience in the iceberg with recycling of plasterboard. So, what do you think the near future about the plasterboard? Are they one of the biggest issue for recycling is the feedstock? Is there enough, do you think, plasterboard that could be recycled so that we can replace the recycled gypsum with or recycled the virgin gypsum by recycled gypsum? So do you think there's enough sources of the plasterboard in the market there?
Yeah, I look at, there is plenty of plasterboard that appears to disappear out of the market, and it doesn't particularly go to landfill as sort of dedicated plasterboard. I think it just because it disintegrates as part of a demolition project, it tends to sort of I think go out with hardcore and with fines material. What we've got to do is really create, I suppose, a model that attracts demolition companies, refurbishment companies to actually segregate the material, and we can offer a service that is cost effective for them, that makes it attractive for them to segregate the material at source, so that we can recover this material that's currently lost, and then can be reused and can displace your mined gypsum. So really, I think it's a combination of legislation, isn't it? The financials. I mean, landfill, or should I say that the landfilling of plasterboard in mixed landfills has been banned for almost 15 years. So it isn't physically, you don't see an awful lot of it going in anything that goes to landfill, but it's certainly disappearing in fines, and we've got to encourage people to do more segregation at source. I mean, you look at this here, potentially 700,000 tons per year of plasterboard that could be recycled and reused. I think this project has been very useful to see what the opportunities and challenges of trying to process this material is, but it's certainly a good step forward, and it's and there's an exciting future here in recovering this material and getting it back into the supply chain.
Absolutely right, Paul. There, I think because the current practice now, especially you dealing with British gypsum, just about the clean plasterboard from construction waste, and you can see here it's, I don't know, more than 70% is refurbishment and demolition plasterboard, and this is why this project is trying to do something about, capitalizing on the contaminated plasterboard. So hopefully, in the future, do you think there is this technology or other technologies will enable maybe 100% recycled content from refurbishment and demolition waste?
I think it's possible. I think 90% may be difficult. I think that the challenges we have is where there's plasterboard that has foam glue to it and there's certain coatings. I think that's again that will be a mechanical process that we need to consider to actually to be able to remove that, and then probably the acid treatment would help to dissolve some of the glues that are in there that have been used as adhesive. I think if we look at that 70%, I think we've got to feel confident that over the next decade we could pull out at least 90% of that. But we have to create the right environmental legislative climate to enable this and commercial climate to make this happen.
Thank you, Paul. A couple of minutes before we bring it to a close, the webinar. Are there any final burning questions or comments, please? So don't think so. So on that note, I really would like to thank our speakers today, Miguel, Paul, and Karim, for their insightful presentation, talking about a major challenge facing the construction industry in increasing the recycled content in plasterboard. Thank you very much indeed, team, and look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you so much. Have a good afternoon all. Thank you.
Thanks
you.
everyone.